Oh, yeah. Grape. Ugh. Well, you like grape. Oh, yeah, not the water.
Chris, last time we talked about work sessions, did we land anywhere with that?
So, hang on, we're about to start here anyways. We can talk about that later. All right, call the meeting to order with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You okay?
Yeah,
You hurt your finger doing the pledge?
got it underneath the table here. Danvers workman's comp right out of.
Yeah, all right. Good evening and welcome to the Monday, September 18th, 2023 Crater River City Council meeting. We will begin with approving or amending the agenda. First thing we're going to remove from consent agenda tonight is the claim approval and transfer of funds, since we don't have those prepared tonight. Is there anything other changes anybody would like to make in the agenda tonight?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to add 7.4. Look at cleaning the pond at Country Court. If we could.
Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, I'd take a motion to approve the agenda with the two changes.
Make that motion.
Thank you, Abe.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Leroy. Got a motion and a second to approve the agenda with the two changes. All in favor, say aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Sheriff's report, Deputy Pearson, good evening and welcome. If you don't mind when you get up there, if you hold that button down, turn that microphone on, please. There you go.
Pretty short and sweet. So this is actually August. Report, so kind of our typical, most of our calls have been medicals and alarms. We didn't have anything major that took place in August. Obviously, a few things that have taken place since then, but that will be next month. We do a report, so not a whole lot on our end. Again, on that side of things, is there anything from the council that you have a question, concern,
Council members, any questions, thoughts? No, I think you're good. So it's one of those things that's on September's report, kind of some property damage sort of stuff that I think I saw in the reports coming through.
Yeah, there was more vehicle theft, we had some property damage, a few more accidents.
Okay,
That one, but
but those happen in September.
correct.
Yeah,
Correct. So obviously the sheriff's office takes the if you look at Sheriff Henry's posts, takes the school bus safety very seriously. So we're working with deputies that are working the east side to make sure that they're in and around Crater River deputies not on trying to catch bus stops, looking for the stop arm violations and some of that stuff.
Good.
That kind of picks up right now with everybody going back to school, month or so, and it's die down until spring then when everybody's
yeah, hot rodding again.
correct.
Yeah,
Correct, so, that's kind of it from us. Deputy Strack, has officially said he's not gonna put his name back in as a Crater River deputy for 2024. So the office has sent out an email looking for, with our, the sheriff's patrol, for a new deputy to step up, to fill his role for a 2-year stint, so. That will be coming, we don't know who that is.
Mhm.
But that will be coming the next month or so.
okay.
Was it too boring?
I know, so it's, we're asked to do it as, you know, as a 2-year commitment. So this was his second year of his commitment. And as most anybody, you know, we have a lot of ambitions, I wanna, you know, kind of try other things, so he is stepping aside to pursue some other options in the sheriff's office, and we'll give another deputy an opportunity to take him aside.
Bill, I've talked to Sheriff Hennon about that a little bit, and he's a big proponent of rotation through the department. So everybody gets kind of a feel for different stuff and has, grows their career. So, yeah. Sorry.
I will say that your presence on Texas Avenue, they are slowing down, so we can get across the road now.
I try and sit out there at the start of my shift, typically half an hour, about 45 minutes. Between Texas and then Eagle Creek. Try to slow it down. 60. That's about what people are traveling.
Yeah.
Speedometers are off 5 miles an hour plus or minus. So, it's slowed down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
65.
Yeah.
70s, so definitely slowing people down, which is one of their goals.
Yeah. Don't get run over on 21 anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Kathy.
I was just gonna ask Deputy Pearson, can you talk about the transition in the sergeants? So
Oh,
Sergeant
yes.
Emerson and
Yeah.
Sergeant,
So within the sheriff's office, of my pay grade, let's call it, they couple of sergeants have switched roles, so Sergeant Emerson was the sergeant that oversaw myself, and Deputy Stratton, Red River. Sergeant DeVodack is now stepping into his role. He will come and introduce himself, currently he's on vacation. So I'm enjoying his extended time off. And he'll be back here, I think, towards the end of this month, and he will definitely come and introduce himself, but, so there's just the sergeant that oversees this change, doesn't really change a whole lot, on our. So. But that's.
Sure. Okay. Perfect.
Thank you very much.
All right. Sounds good. Well, Deputy Pearson, we appreciate your service to our community and appreciate you being here tonight. You too, and be safe out there.
I will.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to consent agenda. Those items on the council agenda which are considered routine or non-controversial are included as part of the consent agenda. Unless a council member specifically requests that an item on the consent agenda be removed and considered separately, items on the consent agenda are considered under one motion, a second, and a vote. Any item removed from the consent agenda shall be placed at the end of general business. Tonight on the consent agenda, we have one item that would be 3.1, the city council meeting minutes from September 6, 2023. Is there any discussion on that or a motion to approve? Thank you, Bill.
Second.
Thank you, Jay. So I've got a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda with the one item. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We'll move into open forum. The public forum is intended to afford the public an opportunity to address concerns to the council. The public forum will be no longer than 30 minutes in length, and each presenter will have no more than 5 minutes to speak. Topics of discussion are restricted to local governmental topics rather than private or political agendas. The council may discuss, but will not take formal action on public forum presentations. Is there anybody who'd like to speak in open forum tonight? If you don't mind stepping up the podium.
Place to sign today.
Oh,
no,
just state your name and address and we'll get that entered in the record.
My name is Denise Peterson. My address is 8030 on 165th Street East. And I'm just here wanting to voice my support of Council Member Abe Santos. Her last meeting regarding the voting machines. Anytime we get into computers, they can be hacked. And a quick search today, literally about 10 minutes. That's all the time I've had to look into this. And it wasn't even about voting machines, but it's just about computers. And there was an article about 72 companies, and it was probably over the last 10 years that have been hacked and had the most detrimental effects to the companies. Some of those companies were Yahoo, LinkedIn, Facebook, Starwood Marriott, where attackers gained unauthorized access to Starwood's system in 2014, and they remained in the system after Marriott acquired Starwood in 2016. However, it was not discovered until 2018. So there was 4 years for the criminals to wreak havoc there before it was even brought to light. Apart from those, MySpace, Twitter, Adobe, Equifax, eBay, Capital One, Uber, Home Depot, Target, and Midland Health. Again, that article had 72 companies. And this is just a small mattering of just names that we all recognize. I'm just asking that you would really consider delaying the purchase of Dominion. There's still cases that are being brought forth. There's still cases that are pending. And per the example of Marriott, it could be years before we actually discover it. It's also an opportunity to hire locals from the community to receive wages for a job. And laws can be changed. It could happen. And so I'm just asking that you consider delaying it to the last possible moment. And look for avenues around that. That's it.
Okay,
This is my opinion, and I have not, this has nothing to do with the Credit River Rural Alliance. Okay, I don't want, if there are people in the group that don't like what I had to say, don't color them bad because of my beliefs.
thank you, Denise.
Yes.
Anybody else for open forum tonight? Carolyn?
I know, I never do this. Carrollton Trophy, 6991, Bridle Path. Ooh.
Are we gonna get a report from Abe? He pushed this off 2 weeks. Put it in the security thing. I just wondered if we're gonna get a report.
But I believe that'll be on the next meeting agenda.
Will it?
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. All right, anybody else for open forum tonight? Kathy?
Cat Talk 17570, working the Lake Boulevard. So. A while ago, I talked to you guys about the condition of the Lake Boulevard and the 75th Street around the park. Quite a while ago, many times actually, we've had conversations. And at one point, a couple of you mentioned to me that you were trying to work with the park district to help contribute to the cost of, where are you at with that?
Nowhere.
Are they still not responding to you or? Okay. Cause I know Leroy, you drive between County Road 21 and Burnsville Parkway, I mean, it's really bad there. And I know that they can say it's kind of a drought and stuff, but last year we had a drought and when Texas Avenue was closed. Murphy Lake Boulevard was kept very well maintained for those people that had to reroute to Murphy Lake, so. I don't think we can use the drought as a reason, and the main thing I want to bring up to you guys tonight is, there's a group of horse people that have contacted the Minnesota Horse Council to see if they can get a grant to help with the cost of maintaining that road. So I just want to give you a heads up about that. They'll probably contact you, I think. So just so you know, so there's people that are very concerned about it. I mean, there's a guy whose bike rack fell off the back of his car the other day. I mean, it's really bad. So, and it's Murphy Lake from like, it's not me, my area is great actually, but it's north.
Yeah.
And then it's 175th Street that goes towards Lakeville up to Orchard Lake, or 170th Street now.
Yeah.
In our defense. Yeah.
Is there one?
Oh, yeah. No, we've been holding off and waiting for it to rain, so it's easier to work with the road. Otherwise, we just burn up the cutting edges and that's $1,600. We don't wanna,
Oh, no, I understand.
Switch them.
Every municipality, especially
Yeah.
townships around that have dirt roads are dealing with this because of the
Mhm.
problem. But there's other options. You can bring in material. There's things you can do. It's a cost, of course, but the people that live on that road should not suffer because you don't want to spend the money.
Right.
You're not getting the money from the park or whatever the reason is.
no, we are gonna, he should have been out blading,
It's really
So,
bad.
yeah.
I mean, it's people's stuff is falling off their cars. I mean.
Well, they gotta slow down.
If you try to go faster to avoid it, you try to go.
Get every other
slower,
one.
you just can't. So
Yeah.
that's it for tonight, guys.
And it's actually supposed to rain here coming up this week,
Yeah.
so
We,
That isn't-
you can't count on it because it'll be 100% chance of rain and go right around Scott
It is
County.
a very busy time for park usage, and it's not just outside people, a lot of Credit River people utilize that.
200 some thousand people a year.
Who's traveled by people with bikes on the back of their, but it's very few horse people, actually, it's mostly bikers, hikers. That are just, the cars are just getting,
no, the school called up too, that it's,
yeah, I can't.
Rough,
imagine
so-
buses. All right.
it will get
All right.
get done.
Thanks, Kathy. Anybody else for open forum tonight? Vern,
We're at 100 or 72, 165th, as long as the gravel roads got brought up. I read somewhere a while ago, and I'm sure I could find the information again, how many paved roads and how many gravel roads in Credit River?
55 miles of paved and 12.
Okay,
Gravel.
those are the numbers I kind of remember, so it's 55 and 12 roughly. Okay, because I told those approximate numbers to somebody and they're like, oh, that ain't right. You know? So, okay.
What the hell do they know, right?
I read it on the internet.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
thanks, Vern. All right, anybody else? With that, we'll close open forum. Move on to general business. General business number 1, ordinance 2023-10, amending fee schedule. Administrator Reynolds.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Back in August, the council approved our business licensing ordinance for THC edible products. As part of that, that was approved with an amendment that took the licensing fee out of that ordinance. And with the statement that we were going to amend our fee structure and include the licensing fee as part of our fee structure ordinance. So what you have in front of you tonight is ordinance 2023-10, setting the licensing fee for the THC business licensing. Put it in there as business licensing fee of $400. That would be the annual recurring fee for the business license. And then the investigation fee matches what we have for our other licenses, which is a $500 minimum at up to $10,000 maximum, and it's an actual cost reimbursement above the $500. And that would just be the first year background investigation that they would need. So we have it proposed ordinance there for council's review and approval.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Anybody have any questions or comments on that proposed ordinance?
I just had one question. Do we
Yeah.
know what the surrounding cities fee structure looks like?
I remember talking to someone over at Prior Lake and they were at like $700 or $750, I believe, on it. We had in the draft ordinance, the THC ordinance, when we had it in there, we had it at 250, which I think is what Bob's experience was with the communities that they were representing when they were using. So you see a broad spectrum of it. So I jumped from the 250 we had in the original one up to $400 in this for this proposed ordinance.
Will that cover the cost of issuing it?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if there's no other discussion or questions, I would stand for a motion to approve ordinance 2023-10.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Jay.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Leroy. Got a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 2023-10, an ordinance amending the ordinance 2023-02, setting certain fees charged by the city. Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. All right, next up, approve construction cooperative agreement for the County Road 27 turn lane improvements. Shane, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Pass this over to you for presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what you have before you tonight is a cooperative agreement to construct bypass lanes or kind of outline the terms for the construction of bypass lanes on County Road 27 at Broadview Drive and 210th Street. We had previously considered a draft of this agreement. If you recall, when this draft was previously considered, the city was actually responsible for the cost of right-of-way acquisition. And we've been negotiating with the county, and so the current version, which was revised by county staff, now the county is responsible for paying the cost for the right-of-way acquisition. With that being said, the cooperative agreement is kind of the first step in the process, or that maybe I should say the next step in the process. After this cooperative agreement is signed, the county will still have to go out there and obtain the right-of-way. The city will have to complete the plans At such time that the plans are complete, we'll revise the construction cost estimate. The cost estimate that's included in the CIP budget still includes the cost for the right-of-way acquisition because that was previously what the agreement entailed. So this will come back to the city council at various steps should we move forward with this project. Again, tonight is just the cooperative agreement. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Anybody have any questions or comments on that?
I have a couple.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So Shane, do we do traffic studies that determine that that the bypass lanes are, justified?
The only traffic study that was completed was completed quite a few years ago was the AUAR study, the Alternative Urban Area-Wide Study. And that was done in the early 2000s when development first started occurring, and it identified several turn lane improvements that were necessary. Most of those turn lane improvements have already been completed, with the exception of these two outstanding turn lanes.
So you don't typically do one within a year or two of doing the project. These can be done 20 years ago. And it's just a matter, are you ballparking it? Like you take a look at how many homes have been built in those subdivisions and you can adequately say that, yeah, this is justified. We have to do this before there's an accident.
That is correct.
And just to follow up on that, Shane, too, wasn't this both of these a part of requirements from the county on the two recent developments in those areas?
Yeah, that is correct. So the
Terra Farms and then Lake Estates. Sorry, Shane.
Correct. Yep, that's correct, Mr. Mayor.
I'm
And
coming.
don't forget also
Yeah.
the territory developments. When the territory or future phase of the territory, which is currently kind of been renamed or rebranded as the Yellowstone of Credit River. As those phases develop to the north, there'll be another connection to 210th Street, and traffic will increase thereby again.
Yep.
Okay,
Bill, did you have any?
that's it. Thank you.
Okay, you good?
I just,
Leroy.
Bill, when that was, study was done, there were 12 or 14 intersections identified at that time.
Okay,
Mhm.
these are the last
We got-
two?
We probably got
Or no?
No.
10 of them done so far.
Because there'll be turn lanes on 91 on the other side of the ranch. That's part of his requirements for that development.
Alright.
And then it potentially could be ones north of there on 91.
Okay,
If that develops, there's land up there that could develop going forward.
so we're pretty much wiping out that fund and it's just gonna have to continue to start being rebuilt again
Well-
as the homes are built.
Right,
So,
yeah.
Mr.
Okay.
Mayor, if I could just address that point really quick.
Yes, Shane.
I think the CIP budget amount is very conservative. At the time that we put together the CIP budget amount, we didn't know the scope of the project or right-of-way acquisition costs or any of that. Just for reference, the last time that we constructed a turn lane was simultaneous with the 210th and Nevada project. And the construction costs for that project were right around 86,000. So, in total, that entire project was probably roughly 120,000. That was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So if you increase for inflation, but I still don't think with the county picking up this, or with the county hopefully agreeing to paying the right-of-way costs, that kind of takes out a big unknown with these projects. And it's really just a construction cost. So again, after the plans are further along in the process and after the county has approved them, we'll prepare a actual engineer's estimate for the city council's information.
Yeah. Leroy.
And also, Bill, on the first ones we did, Gray Fox and some of these, the developer got an agreement with the county and they constructed the
got it.
turn lanes. So,
Got it.
Yeah, in lieu of paying the fee.
yeah,
Yes.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. Yep, this is why street impact fees for development are important.
Yep.
To cover these items. Okay. With that, if there's no further questions, I would take a motion to pass the approve the construction cooperative agreement?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Bill.
Second.
Thank you, Jay. I've got a motion and a second to approve the construction cooperative agreement for the County Highway 27 turn lane improvements. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We'll move on to 7.3, Kathy, the 2024 preliminary budget levy.
Right, we'll start with the presentation on the preliminary budget. As we kind of go through this, we have various pieces just kind of in here for information and kind of understanding the budget and the budget process and the different things we're talking about tonight. First thing to start with is just really to kind of look at some property tax basics. As I heard in several of the city park meetings this summer, how we were the highest tax community in the metro area. And so I thought we'd kind of share a little bit about property tax basics and kind of go through some of this to understand where our taxes stand in relation to some of the other communities around us. So when we start talking about property taxes, we talk about our net tax capacity for the city. We talk as we look at that net tax capacity, that's determined by looking at the property's taxable market value, which is set by the county assessor's office. And then it is multiplied by the relevant class rate. Class rates are set by statute. So when we start talking about net tax capacity, that is impacted by the county and the state for each of the properties within our city limits. Net tax capacity, then we start talking from there, we talk about our taxable net tax capacity. So that is the city's taxable net tax capacity. And that is when we add up all of the net tax capacities of all the properties within the city. We get what our net tax capacity is, and that is what our levy is spread out over as we look across our property taxes. Local tax rate of the taxing jurisdiction is determined by dividing the jurisdiction's levy by the jurisdiction's taxable net tax capacity. Too many same words in here, but our local tax rate is what you really want to look at when you want to compare where our community is compared to other communities. You want to look at what our local tax rate is because that is coming down to where you can compare an apple to an apple. Otherwise, you're not there. So kind of looking forward from there. This chart shows our Scott County and our Lakeville. So looking at Scott County as our comparable county communities, and then bringing in Lakeville just because they're on our border to see where we're at. This is 2022 data, which is the most recent that you can pull off of the state's website at this point in time. So this is looking at our tax rate in comparison to the other communities in the area. So Credit River in 2022, we had a 15.56% tax rate. Elko New Market in comparison had a 47.73% tax rate. Or if you look at Belle Plaine, a 92.42% tax rate. The next lowest one was Prior Lake compared to ours, which was at 30.47% that year. So remember that data as we move forward. You can see how that plays out on the next slide of what that means for us, but you can clearly see that our tax rate is definitely not the highest within our area of Scott County or Lakeville. And as you kind of look across the other data that's on here, you see the residential share. You can see how our tax capacity is built out. So our tax capacity is made up from 94.3% residential. If you compare that to somebody like Shakopee, who's 54.64% of their tax capacity is made up of residential properties. And you can see in 2022, our net tax capacity was approximately $11.5 million. Compare that down to some of the other communities that you see in there, and that shows you what our levy is being spread over is that $11 million at that point in time. Looking at some comparable communities, so when we look at comparable communities on the city, we want to look at communities that have comparable services and offerings as us or kind of similarly situated. That's a little bit complicated for us, given where we're at as being a new city and, you know, the services and so forth that we have. Finding those comparables along those lines is a little bit more complicated. So I think that who are our comparable communities when we look at a high residential share of their net tax capacity, and some ag and really a low commercial share. So if you look through this table, it pulls out Elko New Markets, not too far off from us, Orono, Minnetrista, Victoria, and then Prior Lake is somewhat close with a 90% residential share. And once again, if you look across our comparable communities, you can see at the 15.56% tax rate, we are the lowest. We are the lowest, the closest to us being Orono. But the key is you look at their total net tax capacity, they have $40 million net tax capacity for their 8,400 residents in their community. So they have a very, very high net tax capacity to spread their levy over, which is what allows them to have that 16% tax rate there. Minnetrista, if you look at, is the next kind of closest to us but they still have double our tax capacity with a 22.5 million tax capacity in 2022. And they still had a 23% tax rate. So what does this mean for our taxes? So on this chart, you can see kind of how we come up with the property tax computations. I looked at a random property here in Credit River that had an estimated market value on their property tax statement of $402,000, which determined the property's homestead. It was also a homestead property, so they had a homestead exclusion of $1,042, which gives them a taxable market value of $401,000. A class rate, we go back to our definition set by statute, for a residential homestead property is 1%. So we take their $4,100
$401,000.
Thank you. Numbers, I don't always get along. Times their 1% tax rate, which gives them $4,011. So that property is providing $4,011 towards our total net tax capacity. So when we look at that $11 million, 11.5, this property is providing $4,011 to that total net tax capacity. We take that times our tax rate there in 22, which was 15.56%, which means that individual was paying $624 in city taxes in 2022. If we put that same property down in Elko New Market with their 47.73% tax rate, they would have paid $1,914 in city taxes. And if we put that same property over in Prior Lake with their 30.47% tax rate, they would have paid $1,222. So you can see how our taxes compare to the other cities in around us as we kind of look at what is that tax rate. So going forward, where do you find this information? These are hard to read, but if you look up at the top, you have your tax statement, you'll see your estimated market value. This one shows their 2023 estimated market value of $558,000. They don't have a homestead exclusion on that. It's priced out of the statutory limits there for homestead exclusion. It is residential homestead though. You come down and you'll see, so their taxable market value remains at the $558,200. This one over here is $543,000. The difference between these two is one's in Prior Lake and one is in Lakeville school districts. And you can see how that impacts it. We come down, City of Credit River, the estimated for 23 was $924 in city taxes, or $893 in city taxes. The overall taxes though for the properties for the Lakeville School District was $5,636, and on the Prior Lake one was $4,686. The big difference there is because the Lakeville School District's taxes are higher than your Prior Lake School District taxes. So you can kind of see how that plays out as you go through and you look at the overarching, like I said, of the $4,686, only $924 of it is coming into the city of Credit River on these taxes. So net tax capacity, that means something. Hopefully you can understand how all that's coming together and it impacts our taxes. So we always like to see our net tax capacity growing. And as more homes get built and more development happens, people's market values go up. We add new homes in, we add more market value into our community, which means our net tax capacity is increasing. So in 2022, our net tax capacity was 11.5 million. In 2023, it went up to just over the 50 million mark. And for 2024, we're looking at a net tax capacity of almost 15.5 million. So we like to see this growth and we like to see that number continue to increase as we look at our taxes. Moving on from kind of the property tax basics to talk about a city's fiscal cycle. Kind of once again, just kind of background and information purposes. So as we look here, you look across the blue line, January through December, that represents 2023. That's our current year. We are executing right now our 2023 budget. And so we're working with that one. So if you look at the course of this year though, overall, you see the orange line up above it for 2022. So from January through June, a city is working on closing out that prior year's budget. So you're doing all your year ends statements, all your year end accounting items, and then you're doing your audit and your state reporting. Your audit is due to the state by June 30th by statute. We're required to have our audit to the state by June 30th. So this is really depicted. You can see we are always working at least 2 budgets within the city. If not, at times we're working on 3 budgets and working really 3 years. So we're executing on 23's budget. From the first part of the year, first half of the year, you're closing out and doing all your state reporting and audit for your prior year's budget. And then we're beginning to develop our next year's budget. So really starting about May, we start reaching out to everyone and saying, okay, start thinking about what's coming up and what do we need to be doing in 2024. And start having those conversations, start building out and flushing out that CIP. We've got a 5-year, we start flushing out the out years and really looking at, what are you doing in the next year? But, working on that 5-year CIP. During that June time period, you start doing meetings and talking about what are we going to do, and then we're developing and building out that budget, and then going through the budget work sessions and having the conversations with council with the preliminary budget or the preliminary levy due to Scott County by September 30th. Once again, that's a hard statutory deadline that the city has to comply with. If you miss the September 30th deadline, your maximum levy becomes what you had in your current existing year. So if we miss this September 30th deadline for our 2024 levy, preliminary levy, our max would be set at our 2023 levy by default. So we go through September and then we start October, November, December, we're finalizing that budget. And we have, once again, a statutory deadline of having the final budget to Scott County by the end of December. So December 29th this year is when we have to have it there. And then we close out our fiscal year on December 31st. So kind of, you can see the flow of the budget as it goes through there. And then these lighter gray boxes on here, I put this out here because it's hard to sometimes to envision this. But when we start talking about what are we going to do in 2024, we really need to have those ideas and those things developed and thought through and incorporated into the budget really by the end of June, the first part of July, so we can do that preliminary budget development. Once you get through that first part of July, we can maybe work a little bit with items as we're developing that preliminary budget to come into tonight for tonight's approval. But we're really, that's the end of where we start putting things into the 2024 budget. Once we pass tonight, really new budgetary items that we come up with, new projects, new things that we want to think about doing, you have two options. We either need to replace them in the preliminary budget, which means we take something out that we'd already planned for 2024 and we insert this in because we're at our max, or we move it to 2025. So as I always say is, and I talk about it sometimes, those really good ideas that come up in October and November of the year, they're not coming out and they're not getting accomplished until 2025. This is why we say it takes a long time to do anything in the government, because we can't just turn, we're not like a private business where you can turn and incorporate things in. Our budgetary cycles more restrictive than that. So October, November, December, good ideas, things that come up, you're really, those turn into 2025 items in your marking time to look out for 2025. So it's kind of an overview of that fiscal cycle to kind of help put in perspective where we're at. So right now we are in that preliminary budgets prepared. We're adopting the preliminary levy tonight, and that will set our maximum levy that we can have for 2024. And then we will fine tune that between now and December, and then come back in December and adopt a budget and the final levy as we move forward. So now, kind of moving past those items and start talking about what we are looking at for our budget for this year in our preliminary. So general fund, the changes that we are looking at within our general fund is staffing. Right now, the preliminary budget is being built with an addition of 2.5 FTE, so 2.5 full-time employees. That is looking at a planner and one planner, and then 1.5 on the public works. And the 1.5 on the public works is really one person for the full year and a second person starting mid-year and working from mid-year on. So we probably go into a full-time looking on into 2025 as we're currently looking at that one. Once again, as we've reviewed in our preliminary workshops on this one, the planner is covered and paid for by the building permit and permit fees and escrows for development. Pay for that planner position, so that is not really impacting the levy. It's all coming out of those revenues instead. The public works position does impact in on the levy. But as we build into public works, we would draw down on some of our use of contractors as well. So you see some adjustments coming there. It includes a 3% COLA for planning purposes right now. What I'm seeing across communities that I've heard information from, most are going from 3 to 3.5% COLAs for 2024 is what I'm seeing most planning at right now. General fund changes, other things we talked about adding in a strategic planning session in 2024 for the city, so we can come together and do not just a council-based strategic planning session, but also trying to do a community input strategic planning session where the strategic planning really builds out your 2 to 5 year plan for your city, which all kind of builds to eventually that comprehensive plan, which is out there for that 20-year marker. So doing a community engagement process for the strategic plan. So we put money in the preliminary budget for that. We're looking at doing a codification of all of our ordinances, which will take all the random ordinances and actually put them into a city code book and develop a city code, which would be more like your statutes and what you see in other communities. Make our code, our ordinances much easier to review, find things, and then organization of them for benefit of everyone. It also includes new financial software. We are looking at public works and the development of the public works facility, our public works department buying some equipment. So there's some money in there for rent for some storage of the public works facility or public works equipment. Elections. So 2024 is an election year. We will have 3 elections in 2024. At least that's what's planned and scheduled right now. given the new statutory or new statutes that were passed in 2023, we will have voting is required to be open 18 days prior to the election. So we have 3 elections with 18 days prior, election judges running in here and operating elections. And the other change for 2024 elections is really we have the 2 precincts instead of 1 precinct. So general fund includes the elections. And then what you see, another big factor on our general fund is the full-time fire department. They went full-time in July of this year, so it was only a half year of the full-time budgets. What we see in 2024 is the full year effect of the full-time fire department. General fund, as we look at revenue sources for the general fund, we are looking at a levy, proposing a levy here of 2.4 million to fund our general fund activities. General fund is really your day-to-day operations, your personnel costs, and our public safety that goes into the general fund. We have intergovernmental revenues of 334,000 coming in this year. A lot of that is a one-time payment of some public safety fees from the state. Permits and fees, we are estimating 466,000. Once again, that's paying that community development, and that's where really the planner that we have proposed in the preliminary budget, that's what's paying that person's salary and benefits. Fines and forfeitures, we estimating in at 7,000. Interest, we're estimating at $100,000 for total revenues of 3.3 million for our general fund for 2024. General fund expenditures, don't have this all pie graphed out at this point in time, given all the different pieces and moving parts that we were looking at with our workshops. So our general fund budgeted expenses right now are just over 3 million. What does this support? This supports our personnel, professional services like the city planner, city engineer, city attorney, public works. Yes, you know, public works is all done right now really through contractors. And so all the public works and parks and facility maintenance items are in there. Public safety, our police and our fire, community development and all the development that's going on, elections, and then the rest of the just in general daily city operation expenses come out of our general fund. Just public safety, kind of getting a more detailed look of what we're spending on our public safety. As you can see in 24, we are looking at a 24% increase in public safety costs. And you can look, public safety out of those budgeted general fund expenditures is almost 1 million of it is going to support our public safety contracts with Prior Lake and with Scott County. So our police contract is at $403,000 for 2024, and our fire services is at $586,000 for 2024. So you can kind of see the historical trend. Key things to note: 2023 brought the second deputy online in public safety or in our police contracts. So you see there's a large jump from 22 to 23, and that's because we brought on a second deputy to service Credit River. 23 on the fire side, that's where you brought in a half a year of full-time fire department in Prior Lake, and then in 24 we're bringing in the second half year of the full-time fire Prior Lake. Before I leave general fund, do you want to ask any questions, or you want me to keep going?
Council members, anyone hold your questions at the end, or yeah, let's keep going. Unless you needed that for your drink of water, right? Tap dance around a little drink of water and.
There we go. Okay, so capital improvement plan. So we've heard us talk about a 5-year CIP. That's our capital improvement plan. Capital plan, just kind of a background, is really to help a community anticipate the needs rather than just reacting to problems. It provides time for us to get the necessary resources in place gradually as opposed to all at once. We can look out and forecast what's coming and start figuring out how we build money. We can look for grants, we can look for other avenues to provide funding to accomplish the different things that are out there in that look out. Provides preparation to determine the most economical means of financing a project. And we kind of prepare collectively, it helps to, creates the buy-in, and so you can look at, see what's coming up and understand, so we can start understanding why we're looking at expending these funds. And we can take advantage when there's federal or state programs that come up. There's always coming up with new federal and state programs. If we have something out there in the CIP, we've got some initial planning there. It puts us in a position that we can easily, or more easily, take advantage of those programs and see what we can do towards trying to obtain that money. Where if we don't have anything in that planning queue, it's harder to create a program or a project from scratch to get into these federal or state funding opportunities. CIP is updated annually to reflect the changing needs and our priorities, and the funding opportunities to ensure that infrastructure exists to advance our strategic and our long-term goals and objectives for the community. When we look at a CIP, really what we're looking at, we're doing an action on the current year, or the 2024 in this case, but we have a forecast of what we're looking at out over the next several years, over 5 years. We have historically put one together, really looking at our streets projects. This year we started piecing together a little bit more and starting to put together some more of our projects. So what we're looking at for 2024 for our capital projects. Streets, you can see a total of about 1.6 million on there, and the reconstruct and the overlay, you see that 1.4 million in there on reconstruct and overlay. That 400 of that 1.4 is the turn lanes that we just approved the cooperative agreement on. Parks, we are looking at a parks and trails master plan there for 20,000. We heard a lot in the course of our meetings in the parks this summer about what are we doing in our parks, what are we planning, kind of wanting more different items, from pickleball courts to more playground equipment to different things. So really looking at a master plan so that we can use that to start figuring out how do we work with our parks, what do we put in our parks, what is the community wanting, and looking for that to be a community engagement process, so getting the community's input on that piece of it. We're also looking at sealing the basketball courts and restriping those, and then we have $25,000 in the budget to purchase some playground equipment to kind of start with some updates in the parks. Stormwater, you can see we've got 91,000 budgeted there for 3 different stormwater projects that we need to complete. And on the public safety side, looking at the speed wagons, speed signs to go up to help with some of those speed issues throughout the community.
A question on the pond cleaning, so that's not their property, it's pond, we're responsible for cleaning it.
Yeah.
Stormwater pond,
Stormwater
that's yeah, stormwater ponds cleaning. Continuing on with the 2024 capital projects, we had a lot of discussion about public works and where we're going with that, and we can talk some more on that one later. So this is starting to build out some equipment for a public works department to get them involved and engaged with some items that can keep them busy year round. As we're looking at that one, we have the governments and general government. We're looking at, that's the government center that includes some land purchase and some initial work continuing on with the government center, and looking into that. Air conditioner here at City Hall and the City Hall parking lot, redoing the parking lot here at this building for general government expenditures of 820,000. Then we had water and wastewater, looking at that design study for our water and wastewater. That's at 50,000 for each of those areas. And I do note on here that these items will eventually transition to being enterprise funds and won't be part of, the capital fund, or they'll still be capital projects, but they won't be part of what's being funded by our general levy. They'll be funded by basically your user fees and your connection fees and the different pieces of that. They'll be self-sustaining, but right now these are being budgeted to be funded by want to say reserves or kind of coming out of the levy, out of our general budgeting process and not into the enterprise fund yet, because we don't have any users to do that. So as we get this going, that it will be kind of a refund. We'll track the expenses that go into these so that there can be a payback to the general city accounts for what would be enterprise expenditures. So kind of to summarize all of this, what we're looking at for capital project expenditures in 2024, you can see here total capital expenditures of $2.8 million. Kind of graphing it out, you can see 58% of that is going for streets, some small percentages in other locations, and then the general government is at 29% of those expenditures. So how are those capital projects being funded? Well, we talked earlier, the bypass turn lane fund, the $400,000. Those funds are in there from developments and lot fees with developments. So that's funding the $400,000 for that project. We have park dedication fees. So that fund is paying the $25,000 for $25,000 out of the funds for the parks. Fines and forfeitures, there's that $6,000, that's the speed wagon as we look at that piece. Next year is a bonding year, so we were looking at $1 million bond. Right now that's really for the street projects that we're looking at for next year. We have reserves of $926,000 we'll be looking at, and that does include the ARPA funds that we've received that we have been holding them kind of earmarked for a land purchase for a government center. And then the levy would be, we have the levy funding $400,000 of our capital projects. And then assessments, because we're talking street projects, there's some assessments out there that of $106,000. So of our $2.8 million in capital projects that we are planning for 2024 at this point in time, only $400,000 of that is being funded by the levy. So public works, so we kind of come back around to it. We saw the budget there. So why are we kind of talking about public works? And it's kind of one of those ones we've had the conversation whether we want to call ourselves the city or the township as we were a few years ago. The conversation is still the same. The core function of a city or a township is the maintenance of our city streets, parks, and public spaces. So what legal entity we are, we still have the same obligation. And right now, as we look at what do we currently have our city hall building and the land that it's on. We have parks with about 20 acres of land that needs to be maintained. We have other city-owned land that totals about 22 acres of what I've found so far. Every time I turn around, I find another little lot here or there that's owned by the city. So I'm going to qualify that. What I've found so far, we own. We have paved roads of 52 miles. We have unpaved roads of 12 miles. We have 76 stormwater ponds that we have to maintain, plus a lot of stormwater infrastructure that goes with those ponds. We have the culverts and we have ditches. And that doesn't even include, as we look at, you want to go another step further, we could talk about the CSTS systems that we own in the different communities. So that's what we own, those items. Those are ours that we have to maintain. So we have to think about, public works is thinking about how do we service them and how do we maintain those. And just kind of the footnote here is as we continue to see development, these numbers will continue to grow. So right now, if we look at approved developments within the community that just waiting to kind of finish building and build out, we have approximately 5 more miles that will be added to our amounts of paved roads. And where does that come into play is when you look at and you talk to communities, when you plan for snow plowing, and everybody says you build your public works department in Minnesota based off of what it takes to plow your roads. And you plan 8 to 10 miles on average of road to every route that you have for a snowplow. So if we have 52 miles currently, we're adding another 5 with currently approved developments. That doesn't include any developments that are under consideration and that are being looked at currently, that put us at 57 miles, so 8 to 10 miles per snowplow route, which is what you're looking at. And once again, we still have 12 miles of unpaved roads there, so. That's why we talk public works, and that's why we look at it, because this is a core function of what we do, whether you're a city council or a township board. So why is all of this being talked about right now in particular? Well, we're kind of seeing the perfect, coming together of multiple things. We transitioned to a city, but like I said, whether we were a city or a township, we would be having this conversation. Because we need to address what are we going to do and how are we going to continue to operate our public works. Snow plowing, our contractors informed us that they're looking to wrap up providing services in the next couple of years. It's difficult to find a contractor that's willing to plow snow for an entire city, 52 miles for a community of 5,000. We have a lot of miles of roads. We have a lot of miles of roads, and that's not easy to find a contractor that's going to come in to do that. And most communities look at that and that's why you end up with your own public works and your own departments, is because you can't find the contractors that have the equipment to come in and service that. But we go beyond that. We look at our contractors. They provide the services they're contracting for. They're not looking at the overall maintenance needs. We've seen this become a concern as residents have continued to raise service requests, mainly looking in the parks. I'm not to say anything bad. Our contractors have done a great job mowing the parks for us, but they're not addressing some of the other issues and some of the other concerns that we see the requests coming in for. And you cannot expect contractors to be as responsive to needs. We get middle of the night phone calls, weekend calls for down trees and other items, and contractors are less likely to be as willing to respond in the middle of the night or on their weekends as they have other things going on. And the last point here is because we have council members using their personal equipment to perform public works services, and we can't expect them to continue to operate in that fashion moving forward. So this is just kind of a picture kind of depicting some of this. As I said, you see this top picture here. Grass looks great being mowed, but now I look at the ball diamond and you see all the weeds all over the ball diamond. That's that service, and we had multiple requests to take care of that this year. In the bottom, you can continue to see just a different picture of the weeds there in that ball diamond, and the plate that nobody's out there on our part looking at that and saying, hey, we as a city should be taking care of these kinds of things. We have to wait and be reactive to a resident complaining to us about those kinds of items. Basketball court down below, you see all the weeds growing up. I asked them to go out and spray the weeds, which I'm not sure if they sprayed them and they died from being sprayed, or if they just died because there was no rain and they died that way. But whether they were both, whether that was alive and those are weeds there, or if they're dead, they still impact the ability to use that court in the same manner. So once again, contractors are providing the service that we're requesting. It's just the additional level of service that we're looking at. So the question that's been posed to council through the 2 budget work sessions that we've talked about here is, what is the level of service we want to provide? You can see what we have here, and what is the level of risk you're willing to assume in providing the service? So as we talk about snow plowing being a critical one, and we've already experienced it here once with the township of a contractor telling us late in the fall that they were not going to plow the streets that winter. So if you can't find a new contractor willing to plow it, how are we going to react, and what are we going to do? So what's the level of risk you're willing to provide the service, and what is the level of service we wanted to provide? So we had a lot of conversations about that, which is what led to the inclusion of the public works equipment and starting to kind of build some public works equipment and the 1.5 FTE in the preliminary budget. And just kind of to show the budget planning that we're looking at right now as far as capital planning for public works. This is kind of looking at a gradual, slow roll out of a public works department over the next 5 years. You can see this year, starting with just some general stuff that can be utilized year round, with 25 in the out years. Really starting to look at building the plow trucks up and hoping that we can do a gradual transition of services with our plow contractor currently. And I'll note, as you look at those numbers, sticker shock, those are really looking at new equipment. And as we look at that and we look to the out years, we'll obviously be looking at probably a mixture of new and used equipment, but at least for right now, we just kind of want to show what it could look like and be really happy when we can maybe bring some of those numbers down as we look at out years. Kind of moving on then kind of past the conversations that we had on public works, as I said, that was really going back to that. What's the level of service that we want to provide to the community? What's the level of risk we're willing to accept as we're providing those services to the community? Now we can move into the government center. You know, we've started the work on that. We've approved the architect selection to really start with that space needs analysis in the phase 1 concept of design, to kind of identify what it is we need and what does that look like for us moving forward. But why are we doing this? We really kind of look at spaces needed to store equipment and materials for public works. You see in general fund, we put in some rent. We have some money going in there for rent. That's you know, not the ideal situation to have a long-term rent situation. So it's really, we need someplace to house our equipment. We currently own the grader and it's housed outside of the city by others. We lose hours to commute time and we're excess fuel just trying to get the grader into the community to get started to do it. So getting it inside the city limits and in a position where it can be more effectively and efficiently utilized for the community. Further, we have council members that are having to store equipment on their personal property at this point in time. We really need to get all that centralized into something that on the city space. And as we look at new equipment, we'll need to store that. You know, next point is really office space for employees. Currently, we have the 2 offices. We look towards adding the planner, the city clerk's position there in public works, and down the road getting to utility billing as we kind of forecast out of what's coming, getting another utility billing, accounts payable, receivable type person in to help in finance. We're going to need more space for employees. Current space, as I say, no soundproofing exists in space. One person's phone call or a meeting interrupts the other person's work and makes it hard to work. If you don't want to interrupt the other person's work, you go to your outside office space and you hold your meeting outside. That's going to be good for another month or so, and it's quickly going to become not a really viable option. And then we just look at adequate workspace, improves employee satisfaction and retention as we look out years there. Conference room. This one, I think it's becoming apparent as a few people have seen some of how this is reacting and happening for us recently. This space also doubles as our conference room. And obviously, as we all know, the door is right there. So when people come in for services and we're trying to have a meeting inside the space, it interrupts the entire meeting. And you have to stop and pause the meeting so you can go assist somebody that's walking in looking for services. It happened as we were interviewing architects. It happened on Friday as we were trying to have meetings. We had a morning full of meetings scheduled here and we had individuals walking in, so we had to stop meetings and go deal with that. So it's just not the most functional for us and not the most professional as we have outside people coming in to meet with us, and that's how we're having to work. Nor does it allow us to really provide the services that we want to the community members that are walking in to get assistance. Elections, another reason why we're talking this government centered legislation passed, as I said, requiring us to be open 18 days prior to an election. We really don't have this space. I mean, we have this space and that's really it. But when we have this space occupied for 18 days prior to an election, there's no place for our employees to be. So our employees will be able to be here working. So it's really kind of looking at how do we handle elections moving forward. Storage, we have mandatory retention of certain paper files that are overflowing the back of the room here. We can put things electronic, but there's certain things that we are required by statute to keep our paper files of, and just having some place to store them so they're not overflowing into the space is always nice. Secure storage of election materials as well. And then council chambers, as I said, we need space to hold council meetings and then planning commission meetings and our work sessions. Doesn't have to be grand, this works great as our council chambers, but we still have to have some place to hold these meetings as we move forward. So those are kind of a little bit of background of discussions of the whys on some of the bigger projects there on our capital as we look at our capital planning that's moving forward. So kind of getting into a little bit more of the technical side here as we look at our preliminary levy. Some of our, as we're transitioning here in 2024, we're continuing to move away really from the township budgeting and really moving into city budgeting. And the funds are pretty similar, but there's a few things that are different. So one of the big ones is in previous years, we've had a road and bridge fund that's now been collapsed with our general fund. Auditor has recommended that now that we've transitioned into being a city, because the road and bridge fund is really a township based fund and cities don't utilize that. So we've got some changes and some transitioning that we have happening. Also, that's not really depicted here, is just even within our general fund and how things are budgeted across all the ledger in our general fund will be transitioning, because it has historically been budgeted in a township manner, and it will be changing. A lot of the funds or a lot of the money will be moving into different locations within that our general fund to kind of realign it more with city finances and city fund accounting. Also now our capital fund, we've really pulling out the capital fund to include those fluctuating expenses and one-time capital expenses. And not just the items that are capitalized, but really looking at a broader take of that capital fund. So our general fund, as we kind of start moving from here, should be able to show kind of a more general, steady amount and probably steady increase, because you always have year over year expenses that increase, personnel costs, health costs always increase as you're looking at those kinds of things. And so the 5-year, the CIP and the capital will now show kind of more of those fluctuations and the ups and downs as we look in the out years, but really using the capital, a 5-year CIP really allows us to try and project those planning so we can try and minimize to a certain degree some of those fluctuations in the capital fund as well. So preliminary revenue budget. So this is looking across all the funds for next year. You can see preliminary revenue. So our actuals in 2022, we had 3.8 million in revenues. 2023, we budgeted at 3.5 million. And 2024, we're at 4.1 million for our revenues that we're budgeting. The levy component, as you can see, 2022, we were at 1.8. 2023, we're at 2.5, and we're looking at just over a $3 million levy for our revenues for 2024. So 4.1 million in revenues, and out of that, 3 million of that is being funded by the levy. So 73% of our budgeted revenues for 2024 will come from the levy. So as we look here, as we look at our funding revenues and reserves, so this is kind of a more comprehensive look of not just the revenues, but kind of how are we funding everything on into 2024. You can see the levy makes up 73% at just at the 3 million. Assessments that are out there are 5%. Intergovernmental funds, so this is really the state funds that we're getting from the state at 8%. Permits and fees is 11% of our revenues that will be funding fines and forfeitures, So $7,000 really doesn't fit up to a percentage point. And then we have interest on the funds that we have at 100,000. So those are kind of our revenue pieces, and that totals that 4.1 million in total revenue. But then we look at how are we getting to the rest of our expenses for 2024. We're looking at a bond for $1 million. That's really from our street projects. And then an expenditure of reserves of $1.2 million to get us to our 2024 expense budget of the $6.3 million. Preliminary levy, so you can see kind of the historical where our levy has been at. 2.4 million is being budgeted to support the general fund. From preliminary levy, capital improvement fund is $400,000 from the levy. It will be used to support the capital improvement fund. And then the debt services is $217,000 to support debt services, which pays off our bond payments that we have to do on a monthly basis on our existing bonds. So you can see that this is proposed. It's a $514,000 increase in our levy from last year, and that's a 20% increase. We can see here is general fund, 10% of that increase is largely due to the public safety. As we go back to that public safety side, remember I said that we had a 24% increase in our public safety costs for 2024. And then kind of looking historically, you can see the capital improvements fund, we're at 400,000 in 24. You look back the last 3 years, it's been down around the $100,000, $150,000. But if we went back further from 2021, we went back beyond that. Historically, the capital levy was around $300,000. So this is getting back to around the amount that it was previously. Expense budget, as we look at that, total general fund expenses that we're budgeting or preliminarily budgeting is at $3 million for the general fund. Park fund, $25,000 for expenditures out of that. Our turn lanes or bypass lanes, that's $400,000. Expenditures for our debt funds, that's our bond payments, $463,000, and total capital expenditures is $2.4 million here. Some of those numbers you'll see may not match up. That's because a few of those things in capital are right now up in the showing in the general fund. So you got a little bit of maneuvering to make all those match exactly, but we didn't have time to put all that together
So
from the last work session.
question, the number for expense, general fund expense on page 7 is 3040. This is 3072. Is that what you're talking about? Some money hasn't been moved out.
Yes. Yeah.
So what's the numbers? Is it 3072 or 3040?
Well, the general fund is going to maneuver some more because we have some other things that are in there, but it will not impact our.
That the total. It's just.
It won't impact the levy
I'm
as
just
we're
wondering,
looking at it.
3072 or 3040. You know, if you don't know that.
I couldn't give you the 3040 is the more accurate one because this predates. This is from our last work session, so this slide. And so the 3040.
We get an updated one when
We
comes back then.
will, we're not going to necessarily be updating on this. We will be finalizing and putting together the final budget, and we will be working towards that. So we'll have numbers as we keep moving forward. But those expenses, I mean, that's kind of where we're at right now, and then we'll be fine tuning all of those expenses as we move forward. And the key is tonight is you're not approving these numbers, you're approving the levy, which is our maximum levy, and any of the changes that we have here will not won't impact what we're putting into our levy. This shows our estimated preliminary fund balance. This is showing a lot of projections, I would say right now. When you're looking at budgeting for the city, you want to look at your fund balance from 2022, and we're incorporating that fund balance is what we can really use for payments for 2024's budget. And what we have at the end of 2023 gives us reserves to be able to pay what we're looking at in 2025.
And why do we go back 2 years, Kathy, as opposed to 2023's estimate?
Because, well, if I'm looking at, because I don't know, because it's an estimate, so you're not relying upon those numbers, you're really looking at what do I have? Because my known number at the end of my audited numbers for 2022 is what you look at to say, okay, this is my fund balance, so that's what I'm gonna budget and plan for into 2024. And then when I get to the end of 23 and you get to all your year ends, then you can make your transfers. And then you'll know all that will occur during that year end, that January to June timeframe of the next year. So that can roll into your, your 2025 planning cycle. So this has got a lot of projections and, where do we think we will be? And we have a really high number there for our fund balance of where we project the general fund will be. That will be, if we get to the end of 23, we'll be analyzing that one. And the typical approach within a city is to look at taking your general fund and transitioning those funds down into like a capital fund to use for your capital expenditures. In transferring, so you're down to your target rate, which is anywhere 60 to 65% is what you want to see there. So we'll be doing some fine tuning of that as we move forward, and it'll also get some fine tuning as we look at some of the adjustments that we have for the preliminary budget or for the budget to get to final
Just
budget.
say we take the general fund excess and put it down to capital expenditures fund, but then we don't need a bond of $1 million.
You're still gonna want the bond of the $1 million because you got to look at what you're looking at for your out years and projections as we're looking at some of this stuff. So
I don't quite understand.
it's.
I'll need some help understanding.
Yes, we've got some fine tuning that we'll be working on with some of these numbers. So as we look at this, this chart shows really we put that proposed levy, just over the 3 million into this chart. It has the tax capacity for 2024 of the $15.492 million. And with our proposed levy that we have here, it shows our tax rate. We go back to the beginning of the evening, what we were talking about, shows us at a tax rate of 19% for our proposed levy. There we go. So we go back to our computations. So if we just look at where we've been, we go back to our same sample house here of a $400,000 home. We looked at 2022 had the 15.56% tax rate. That home paid $624 in property taxes in 2022. 2023. Our tax rate was 16.14%. So assuming the market value remained the same, their city taxes went to $647. With 2024, with the preliminary levy that we're looking at right now, our tax rate would go to 19%, which means that property's taxes would go up to $762 for 2024. So next steps as we look at this. So tonight we have the preliminary levy resolution for the council to approve. That levy, once that's approved, has to be transmitted to Scott County by this September 30th. It does set our maximum levy amount for 2024. And as I've said, we still have some work with starting basically the 1st of June. It's been a fast-paced run to get us to this preliminary levy, and we've had a lot of discussions and a lot of thought processes going here with issues of government centers, public works departments, planners, and kind of looking at staffing. So we've got a lot of variables and a lot of things we've tackled in the last really month, as we look at our budget. And so tonight sets our maximum levy. We'll be doing some fine tuning with those budget and our budget numbers in October and November. And so in December, we will bring back a final budget. So we'll have the levy, truth and taxation presentation on December 4th at our regularly scheduled council meeting. And then a final levy resolution and budget resolution to be adopted either at the December 4th meeting or at the December 18th meeting. So we can submit them to Scott County by the end of the year, statutory deadline that we have. So with that, I will happily stop talking for a while and let's.
Grab yourself a drink of water and stand for questions. Okay, council members, questions, comments?
CSTS, we could talk about that. I assume that that's not part of the sufficient technology.
No, because it doesn't affect the levy.
Not part of the final budget either.
No.
We will prepare the final budget for the CSTS. I don't know that historically it's managed to get in the final budget, but I do, I mean, that's our goal and our intent is to have our enterprise funds. So the CSTS systems currently have that final budget along with our general fund and capital, budget that we're talking about now, all finalized for that December meeting. So you can see that as well. So we've already had a preliminary look at the capital plan of what we're looking at for that. We're still working on kind of the operations and maintenance. So we'll have the goal is when we look at December, we will have all of the funds, including the enterprise funds and any recommendations on rate changes or anything for discussions as we look at that final budget time.
And the public doesn't have to wait till December 4th if they want to approach in an open forum or write emails to the council. They can do that with this preliminary budget if they have concern about it. Because I had a couple of people say we have to wait till December 4th. How do we know?
This is preliminary, so they can look at this. They can provide comments. I always say community members can always contact their council members and provide their thoughts, their input on it. We don't have to wait till the December 4th. Like I said on this one, the key is it will be there will be modifications coming as we really are still working on those final budget numbers, and then we'll have to see how that impacts the levy. But as we said, the levy will only go down. That's the only option we have. It'll either remain steady or go down as we work towards finalizing those numbers. And like I said, the final few changes that we had from the last work session as we're looking forward.
Okay. Abe?
Yeah, I've got, I don't know how deep we want to go, so I'll maybe just note, and then I'm back on Bill's comment about bond and about capital. We got 94% of our fund balance of expenditures, and A++ is 60 to 65. Seems to me like we should be looking at that a little bit, especially when we're taking 3.3 million in and expenses of 3.040. We got to figure out how to. I just don't want to keep seeing an increase. So anything, I think we've got to look at figuring out how to bring that down a little bit. And I'm not looking for a comment. That's just a statement. The other thing is public safety. Fire makes sense to me. What was the police? It was about a 16% increase on police. Was that the extra equipment they were asking for, or what was that? Or was that just the phased approach that they were doing?
So from our meeting with the sheriff, there was a couple pieces. The big one was vehicle mileage. The rate that they were charging us. They discovered that wasn't the true cost. So as Scott County went through and, as they're honing in their budget, they had all their departments go through and look at their costs. Fleet recognized they weren't charging any of their departments enough to cover the cost of the fleet.
Okay. And then the last thing I'd say is I really think we should back to the statement, Bill, you made is, public hears this truth and taxation on the fourth. I really think that we just have to not even look at the fourth for the approval. Let's give a little bit of opportunity. Let's make sure we have a lot of communication out there. Let's get this on the front page of the website so people start to see this, because I think if we do this in a vacuum, and then people see this increase again, perceived or not, right? I know when you look at your tax statement that it's a very small portion of it. But I think we gotta get in front of it and make sure we have this out readily available to the community. So those are my statements.
Okay, thank you, Abe. Leroy, anything? No? Jay?
I'm just gonna back up on Abe.
Okay,
It's an increase.
And
Bill?
I just have a statement I want to read. I'm in agreement with components that make up both the revenue and expenditures reflected in this preliminary budget. However, I would like the city council to discuss further our use of reserves to soften the blow of another very large annual levy increase. Last year, our levy increased 34%. This year, we're proposing an increase another 20%. Like the city council to consider using roughly about $388,000 in excess general reserves we currently hold, or reduce the amount of the bond we're proposing for next year. By doing this, we can reduce the levy increase from about 20% down to 5% or close to the rate of inflation. I heard at our last meeting, a very legitimate concern that we shouldn't be using fund reserves to cover recurring expenditures. I've combed through these expenditures for next year and I've come up with roughly $355,000 expenditures that are typically not realized that we would typically not realize in a given year. They're either non-recurring expenditures like financial software costs and public work investments that we're doing, or they are higher than a normal year, like next year's election costs or park upgrades. Bottom line, 2024 general fund expenditures as percent of prior year fund balance is 94.5%. If I go back to 2022, it's even higher percentage. Our finance director told us last meeting that our target is 60 to 65%. The council agrees that using the $388,000 in reserve to cover some of our next year's expenditures, this percentage drops to 82%. So still materially higher than the target. One other data point, and Abe just mentioned, our estimated general fund revenues exceed expenditures of roughly $250,000. I wrote this when I didn't know what the number was. I don't believe it's necessary given our current fund balance. I think revenue shouldn't be that much higher than expenditures. So I asked the mayor that the topic of using a portion of the reserves to cover a portion of next year's expenditures be on a future agenda before we approve the title fund.
Yeah, Bill, I don't disagree that we should investigate that and have staff work that through to find out what that looks like in the model. Especially, I think the thing to concern about is on our cycle of 3-year bond for road construction and capital improvements. How would that affect that? What does that look like in the future years? Just making sure that we're not making a poor decision now that will affect, then we have to bond in the interim, right? Then that throws us off that schedule. So I think, staff and certainly I would hope you would share those, findings with staff of the pieces to investigate and look at, and, that way we can, have that research done prior to, we get to our, December closing dates on this stuff, right? That's a good part, right? So it's a time for us to have some time to do the research on those types of items.
And I'm not, the revenues, the expenditures, I'm not asking to change those. Just can we lower the levy amount, and use reserves or reduce the bond? That's all I'm asking to take a look at.
And as I said, that slide and looking at it and putting that out there, you're looking at a projected for 24, which sort of is.
We have to
It's not. I don't look at that and say in the context of budgeting for the city that's smart to look at our projected for 24. We need to ensure that we're looking at today's. What do we have? Things could go sideways between now and then. When you remember the purposes of our two funds, the general fund is your recurring everyday expenses. They do get some one-time expenses that will come out of it, like the financial software. And those are the items where it's like we can adjust some of those changes that the council had requested at the last meeting, which would be ongoing expenses, but not adjust that levy amount because we're looking at those. And that revenue where you're seeing the amount that our revenue is over. Not fully, but that's really the one-time funds from the state. A lot of that is one-time funds from the state for public safety. Where, great, I could reduce by $230,000 to account for the one-time public safety funds that we're gonna get from the state, but then in 2025, I'm gonna have to increase the $230,000 to make back up for it because it goes away. And so
But how do
You
we ever
would
use the
save-
reserve? How do we ever use the reserve?
we
make that-
use the reserves and, I mean, it's very, let's go back.
Cause I look at the general fund reserve and it's grown from 1.7 million up to
Well-
3 million over the last couple of years. And that's.
Bill, remember, there's one big difference that you're looking at right now. This is your first year of having a full-time finance director and your first year of having a full-time city administrator. You've taken the turn here to get more professionalism into the city and into the work that we're doing. Where we'll be addressing that, but I can't address it all in this very first budget. It's going to be kind of, developing a 5-year capital improvement plan, looking at where we're going and what those expenditures are. And looking at how we use those, looking at what we have in those reserves and making some switches and making some turns, but we can't do it overnight and kind of changing some of that philosophy. So we've taken a step to do that. There's pieces there. I look at 94% and I say, we don't need that, and I don't need that out there. What we need to do though is look at what do we see as those costs that are coming? So, we look at, already in our capital projects, you got 2.8 million. It's only being serviced by a $400,000 levy. So we're not using an excessive amount of levy to service these capital projects. We're using $900,000 of reserves to service these levy projects. So when we look in the out years for 2025 and we see what's coming, we want to try and establish that levy in an amount that I can say, here we can keep this, we can try to keep a $400,000 levy and keep some consistency, but I have these reserves now that I can utilize to offset it. So you pulled out the public works. And so you pulled out public works as, some of those one-time expenditures. But our capital planning for 2024 for that's 131,000. It's 400,000 in 2025, 325 in 2026. So 131 there. If I take all that and service it by one-time funds, then I have 400,000 that I have to come up with in 2025. Where if I'm servicing 131, maybe not with one-time funds. Well, now I've got 131 as I'm going into 2025 and I'm looking at 400,000. So that's, as I'm looking at those reserves, I'm looking at those out years in that CIP and seeing where do we have that so I can do some planning that keeps us as relatively consistent in minimizing those big peaks of saying, how do I make the jump here from the 131 to the 400,000? We built a government center in 2025, which we don't know what that budget looks like right at the moment. Well, we have to get to that dollar amount really for the debt service for that, because there'd be financing and bond on that one. Well, how do we do that without having to make a huge jump to get to that debt service amount? Well, I look at those reserves and I say, those reserves could help me not have to have as large of a bond for a government center, which means I don't have to increase the debt service levy by that much to service that levy or to service that debt service in the out years. You're going to look at it like a 30-year bond, probably on the government center, depending on what the final dollar amount is. So how do we utilize all of that one to put it all together? So I don't like seeing 94%. I think that's too much in there. Usually cities do the 60 to 65%.
Yeah.
But I caution to just say, oh, well, let's just cut everything out and make our levy flat this year. And then, because then we're going to hurt ourselves in 2025.
And I think that's what the ask would be, right, is to look at that and analyze that as just making sure that verifying that this is the right spot for this year, right? And, as we go through and fine tune things, if we need to make some adjustments, we make some adjustments.
Yeah.
That's what the next the next couple of months is, make those adjustments, do that research, dial it in to make sure we're on the right path.
And while we have that December 4th, is the community's opportunity for the presentation and to provide comment on this. October, November, before we get there, because we are still fine tuning so many of these numbers. With changes that were made at the last work session that we haven't been able to incorporate all of that into what we have today. We'll have an additional work session, at least, between now and then, but we just have to get this through. And like I said, we did the analysis enough to say those changes that we were talking about, that we still need to work into this, we're comfortable that we don't need to increase the levy to do those. So when you're looking at those, the reserves, when we're looking at those extra funds that are being budgeted right at the moment, as you kind of see, our expenditures going to go up, but they'll come more in line with where we're looking at our revenue sources for the general fund. So we think that's going to play out without having to do the levy increase, which is why, this will set our max and we'll think we'll be okay with that one.
Good.
Can I just one more?
Yeah.
So could we have that as one of the talking points then is our projection of reserve over the 5-year? Can we go after, I know not during this process, I understand we can't turn on a dime and we can't change everything, but I think we have to talk through that so that we have a good dialogue.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? Otherwise, I would take a motion to approve resolution 2023-24. Resolution to set the preliminary 2023 levy for the collection in 2024.
I'll make that motion.
All right, I'll take Abe. You want a second then, Bill? Okay. All right, I've got a motion and a second to approve resolution 2023-24, a resolution to set the preliminary 2023 levy for the collection in 2024. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We'll move on to general business number 7.4. Leroy wants to talk about pond cleaning in Country Court.
The pond, the holding pond in Country Court is just about dried up. And if we could get in now with a long reach backhoe and dig that pond out, pull that excess dirt up to let it drain off, because when we get rid of it, we pay by the ton. And let that water seep out until this winter so we can haul it away possibly. It would be a lot later. And it needs to be started. And it should be done before the road improvements happen in a couple of years. So. And that was budgeted, I believe, last year. Some of that.
How much is it roughly?
Well, what we had, or was that a quote we had? I thought we budgeted, anyhow, it was 6,000 to rent this backhoe for a week. And it's roughly 6,000 for a man fuel and a truck to haul 3 loads away that need to be moved now from a little island by the drain tile or storm sewer. So throwing it out there, we could do it, it'd be great.
And if it's a 12 grand total, and if we did it when the ground was heavy and wet, it would cost more.
So the transportation would certainly cost more. And
Yeah. That's
yes.
the transportation and the tonnages to get rid of it. We do need easements from 3 property owners to do this. To go on there, but if it gets wet and the pond comes up, it's gonna be a lot soggier around the edges to do this.
Have you talked possibly to Fair Lake Aggregates about maybe disposal back in there? It's all
We can't.
still- They can't? Okay.
No, we already had that discussion.
Okay.
So. So throwing it out there,
So I don't, so I know we're proposing sometime. I saw Abe, you flipped your page over and I saw you pointing at the number because we have some money proposed in next year's budget for that. 75,000. I don't recall if we had a specific line item for this year in that one.
tried to get hold of Dominic.
Yeah, Dominique is out of pocket here for a little bit. It would be good to verify if we've got something set for this year, because if we can get ahead of it while it's dry, we don't know. Hopefully next year it's not dry. But at the pace we've been going on, who knows, right?
But if we get,
But if we can get ahead of it,
if we get a lot of rain and snow this fall, then we're gonna be spending another $6,000-10,000 to pump the pond out.
We've
which
done
doesn't
that.
Make any sense
Right.
either.
yeah, we've done that in the past as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because that pond has no outlet. And the whole neighborhood drains to it.
If there is money
Yeah.
that was budgeted for this. From last year, would you guys be okay with spending up to the 12,000?
Definitely would
Yeah.
say.
Try and get
Definitely
a-
make sense.
100%.
Get a hold of it.
Yeah.
Get ahead of it.
And it has to be done. I mean, that's.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Well, that-
silted in.
The island just outside of the
I know.
inlet pipe is.
Or standpipe has
It's
to-
silted in for many years.
So
Mhm.
If you, Mayor, if you want to, if the council wants to approve it, would be up to the $12,000 pending budget.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Confirmation that we can. Find the money in the budget to do it this year, then. I'll do some digging and looking and see what we have,
yeah,
see if we can. Get
Okay.
that in there. At least then we have the approval pending the budget.
exactly. Yeah. So if would we want to pad it just another 3,000, make it 15,
just round it off.
just round it off? Just to gives us a little, if again, we're talking about, an approval considering, then considering budgetary analysis on it. So I don't want to have a stop on a, project that could save us some money over $3,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would take a motion to approve conditionally up to $15,000 pending budgetary research. To do some initial cleaning of the pond in Country Court.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Leroy.
I'll second.
Thank you, Abe. So I've got a motion and a second to approve conditionally up to $15,000 pending budgetary research. For some initial cleaning of the pond in Country Court. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Here none, motion passes. All right, any staff or council member update or reports?
I was going to just share some information with the council, if you,
Okay,
um. This up here,
no building permits.
yeah, so just kind of. Wanted to give you an overview as we've kind of been talking about permits and talking about planning, so you can see where we're at. This year. So right now, major permits, that's your new construction, additions, larger remodels. Accessory buildings, garage add-ons and all. Things along those lines, with year to date, we're at 93. Minor permits, we're at 234, so 329 permits so far this year. Looking at new construction, just kind of pulling that number out, we had 13 new home construction permits. The major permit, so the valuation associated with major permits, and now pools go into that major permit, and there's not, the valuation is a little bit odd on those, so don't think this is over 93, but those that are valued out on the major permit, we're looking at about $16 million with there, and the major permit, the fees that we've collected off of just the major permits, so those 93 is 349,000. So kind of an overview. As you can see, August was a really busy month with 94 permits being issued, and September, this is just month so far to date, we're already at 51, which is our second highest month so far, and we're not done. So that's just kind of an overview of where we're at this year so far with permits.
Yeah,
And I don't have a back year comparison because this is the first year in citizen service, so it's the first year we can really I can pull this data, I don't have the access to it, to see a straight comparison of these numbers in 2022 or before.
Yeah, Kathy,
Can you answer a question?
well, yeah, can I ask my question first? I saw Kathy raising her hand. I just wanted to get mine in first. Maybe mine answers her question. Can we get this on a regular basis?
Yeah, my goal is to start trying to get this out,
Mhm.
hopefully maybe monthly, but having the planner will
Right.
help me pull this data, but I just tried to pull it together real quick. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then, so that we know the major permit fees, do we know the minor permit fees?
The reports that I had didn't really,
Address that?
weren't addressing that one, so I've got to build and I not fluent yet in Citizen Serve to figure out how to build it all out, so I've got
Okay.
some building to do to pull some reports together that will provide that one, but this is what I could get today out of the system, so.
Yeah, yeah. Kathy?
Could you shoot me a copy of that, please? I can give you my email address.
After the meeting, we talked about it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good info.
That's all I have for reports.
All right. Sounds good. Well, if nobody else has anything else, I take a motion to adjourn.
1 second, I've got 2 reports.
Okay,
Back to comments, I do have. Julie and I did connect from Scott County. I'll be going out there, not this coming Friday, but the following Friday, so I'll have the report for the next meeting. And then I was getting some comments on recording on work sessions. So I checked with Lakeville, they do audio on request for citizens. I think we should really look at that for our next work session and for following work sessions, just to make sure we have that. We can talk through exactly what that looks like, but I think it would be good to have that recorded for future.
so I think there's been some discussion around that one, and I know Bill, Kathy and I kind of had a roundtable on some of that. I think that probably builds into a bigger topic of probably developing bylaws for operation of the council and all that. And I think that's probably a good idea that we put that together. I think one of the things I'll just throw this out there, but I would be happy to join with somebody else on a committee to like put a draft together of something like that. So that we can consider that as a, make one big change for
Absolutely.
something like that. That, typically a council will adopt those or amend them at the beginning of the year, but we should, if we work on something now, we can have something in place either right before the end of the year or, as we begin our annual, reorg for January. And I think, we can use some models from some neighboring communities of already existing to kind of give us the topics of what we should be considering on there.
Hopefully
And
not 16.
the one I sent Bill as an example was 16 pages. It does address a lot of relevant stuff though. So it's not out of the question, right? But you're right. There are some pieces, I read it. I did read all 16 pages and there are some things in there we won't need, without a doubt, but most of it probably makes a lot of sense. So if you don't mind, with somebody else, I proposed before, Bill, that, you and I could work together on this and put a draft together, if you guys are okay with that.
Leroy was really get you together.
No, I gotta get the pond clean.
Unless you want to clean the pond. All right, so Bill and I will start working on that and we will come back with a draft of this, I don't know, it'll probably take us a month or so to get a draft put together, but we'll get a draft put together. That way we're actually have a set of bylaws to govern how we operate our meetings, what we do, where we do it and all that, and I think that would make more sense than just picking away one at a time, the pieces of it, right?
That sounds great.
Okay. All right,
I'll make the motion.
You ready?
Adjourn.
all right, Abe.
Second.
All right, Jake. Been a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.